Hmm.
Now, the question that comes on from that is, well, what's the next stage of evolution?
Yeah.
This is where religion kind of offers an answer which science cannot, because in effect, what religious teachings are saying, what Islam Ahmadiyya in particular is saying, is that the trail of evolution continues. We're going to continue evolving in the direction of increasing consciousness. Only now you've become conscious of a non-material entity, and so now your evolution is no longer material; it's actually a non-material process, and that
Yeah.
is spirituality.
And the next comment is going to be here. So this was I just thought it was just lovely in a way. So it says, the mystery of beauty and the mystery of metamorphosis, as noted by Wallace. That realization from this interview is breathtaking and such great evidence for ID. Also, Darwin is racist and has a supremacist worldview. It is no wonder that his findings were mobilized for racist genocidal policies. So let's just talk about, just briefly, the mystery of metamorphosis, as noted by Wallace. What did you make of that when you saw that? I mean, I think you've already read that aspect of what Wallace had said already. But what did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean,
Wait, should we? Sorry, should we quickly summarize for those who haven't seen that video?
yeah, I
Basically,
think you should do that.
so Alfred Russel Wallace was Darwin's rival, and that's the name of the video. He co-founded the theory of evolution, but then said that natural selection can explain some things, but actually you have to rely on God guiding evolution for so many other things. By the end of his life, they vastly outnumbered anything that selection could explain, really. And one of the things he spoke about was metamorphosis, how the caterpillar becomes the butterfly. Because he said, well, if all of its needs were met as a caterpillar and it was surviving perfectly well, why did it need to become a butterfly? And why are so many things like why do we have so much beauty in the natural world? This is not necessary for just pure survival. And in fact, why do we have so many of these different features in the natural world which do not pass the principle of utility, meaning that it's not simply the case that they are necessary for survival. And he gave the example of, for instance, let's just choose one. Let's say deep mathematical ability, because humans have had this throughout history, even when there's no maths to speak of. And even today, in some indigenous tribes, they don't have any form of mathematics apart from the most basic arithmetic. If you take a child from such an indigenous tribe and you raise them in England and you train them in mathematics, they'll be able to do extremely advanced mathematics and may even win a field medal, fields prize, whatever it's called. So that means that knowledge was latent, and that ability, that mathematical ability, was latent in humans themselves. And it's the same as for musical ability, for spiritual ability, for language even in itself. So many things are unnecessary. You can survive without them, and humans could survive without them. So why do we have them? And Wallace was led to believe, therefore, that evolution was directed to a higher purpose, that ultimately the natural world was there to serve humans, and humans are there for their moral and spiritual progress. So that comment was referring back to that. And I just wanted to know, I mean, did you have any particular thoughts on that whole phenomenon, and Wallace's noticing of that as he did in that era?
I mean, the fact that he noticed it is shows the penetration of his mind compared to Darwin, who strikes me as a man who continually sought justification for his theory, for his philosophical beliefs.
Yeah.
His theory was constructed so as to serve his philosophical outlook, that of materialism, in effect. Wallace in particular I like, because he and the point he makes here about that it seems we're constructed to serve a higher purpose, is very telling, because it strikes me as something very similar to what the fourth Khalifa of the Ahmadiyya community in his book Revelation, Rationality, Knowledge and Truth wrote, in which he said that to him evolution bore less resemblance to natural selection in terms of it showed less evidence of things simply being selected by their environment, than actually that the trajectory of evolution shows discernible direction from a state of low consciousness to a state of higher consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this paradigm, which is exactly correct. I mean, you get prebiotic organisms, microorganisms, plants. First you get algae on the sea floor, and then you get on the sea surface, then you get plants eventually, and then eventually you get animals of some sort, and then you get
Hmm.
a development into mammalian life form, and then you get into um, hominid life form, basically.
Yeah.
So that shows a clear trajectory in the very brief outline of increasing consciousness, increasing cerebral ability, increasing awareness of one's surroundings.
Hmm.
Now, the question that comes on from that is, well, what's the next stage of evolution?
Yeah.
This is where religion kind of offers an answer which science cannot, because in effect, what religious teachings are saying, what Islam Ahmadiyya in particular is saying, is that the trail of evolution continues. We're going to continue evolving in the direction of increasing consciousness. Only now you've become conscious of a non-material entity, and so now your evolution is no longer material; it's actually a non-material process, and that
Yeah.
is spirituality. And so that is also what the Mirza Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be on him, founder of the Ahmadiyya community, in his book Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam, when asked on the chapter, "What is the purpose of life?" he writes, "The purpose of life can be discerned of an organism, can be discerned by that to which the faculties of that being reach to the highest point." So he said, a bullock can only ever dream and is clearly suited to, you know, walking around in a field. Okay, that's what it's clearly adapted and suited for, and that's the highest reach of its abilities. But when we consider man, he says, and a human being, he says the highest reach of man's imagination and mind reaches to the concept of an immaterial God and creator. And that indicates that that is actually its highest point, and that is the destination of its development.
So we have spiritual evolution that's ongoing.
Yeah, which is a continuation of the material evolution we've undergone. And I mean, if one was getting really pedantic about things, you could even argue that the evolution that we have undergone is spiritual in nature already, because nobody really understands, for example, a lot of the features of or the behavioral features of any organism on the planet. Nobody knows why bees do a dance, or why flies behave in a particular way, or why animals have what we call instinct. Nobody knows
Yeah.
any of. There's so much of animals that we assume is biological in terms of genetic or physical. We have no idea what it is. And the Quran says about the bees, for example, it says that the behavior of bees is a manifestation of God's command to them of revelation. So the question is all animal behavior, is it in actual fact a manifestation of a command from God to the souls, to the spirit of animals?
I was just on that. It was interesting. I was reading a book recently called "The Strange Order of Things" by Antonio Damasio, and he's a big shot neurologist, and he's very smart. Obviously, all due respect to him, he's done a lot of good work in the fields of emotions and affect, and it's about that. But I had to stop it. I couldn't continue because he kept on basically explaining. He kept on describing how bacteria have behavior, and there's a lot of research showing that they have behavior that is similar to ours, but obviously much more rudimentary. And it seems that they have almost forms of emotions. They have very basic forms of emotions of seeking security, or even forms of altruism, that kind of thing. I'm not sure if it's specifically altruism, but there's a lot of research showing that bacteria have behaviors like us, but in a much more rudimentary form. But then he kept on saying that, but obviously they're not conscious, really. I'm not saying they're not conscious. They obviously don't have conscious. You have to have a nervous system and these kinds of things. And I was just like, how do you know? Why do you keep covering yourself? And then he kept on speaking in this kind of like double language where he was almost saying, well, I think maybe they are conscious, but not really. And why don't you just bite the bullet and actually accept that life is life and that consciousness is consciousness, and that even very rudimentary forms of life have consciousness, and even if it's not as developed as we have, but there seems to be this driving force in science to say that everything is just reductionist, everything is your nervous system and stems out of your nervous system, and you have to have a nervous system to be conscious, because consciousness obviously isn't anything weird or slightly spiritual, heaven forbid. So there's this undercurrent.
Not heaven forbid. You can't say that.
It's being ironical, but okay. So I was just it was another example of how afraid people are of even mentioning the idea of a spirit or a soul. And it strikes me because in that book, Revelation, Rationality, Knowledge and Truth, by the fourth caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, he says something in his one of the most brilliant chapters on consciousness, and they're all brilliant chapters. But yeah, specifically a brilliant chapter on I think it's actually in the question of suffering, and he said that bacteria have a diffuse sense of consciousness, which you cannot pin down, but they have it. And I remember reading that as a youngster. Obviously very old and grey now, but as a youngster, I remember reading that, and I just, it's always struck me because it seems true, but it seems also very strange that they have a form of consciousness. But scientific research is also showing this. Will the scientific community accept that and accept that maybe consciousness isn't dependent on your nervous system?